What are the best Yu-Gi-Oh? My fault. What are the best rogue Yu-Gi-Oh strategies post Battles of Legends Terminal Revenge? Big dog, because of the new set, we are going to be doing a new rogue tier list and ranking these strategies based on if they can challenge the meta or if they should just leave the terminal. Not all of us can accept it, but some strategies should take that flight to Cancun way sooner than later. Let's go ahead and jump on in. Okay, big dog, so the criteria for this tier list is incredibly simple, my friend. The rogue tier list is based on two important factors. The first is how well does your strategy go against the most popular cards in the meta. Right now, a lot of people are using a ton of hand traps. The normal suspects, Ash, Valor, Imperm, and then as a little bit of a spice, Nib, Ghost Ogre, and Ghostmourner. The next and most important thing is how well does your strategy go against some of the top Yu-Gi-Oh decks. Right now, Snake Eyes is considered tier 0, but there's a lot of other crazy good Yu-Gi-Oh strategies that can compete. Tenpai Dragon, Labyrinth, Melodious, Branded. I actually made a video talking about the top 5 Yu-Gi-Oh decks, so if you want to see how those strategies are really powerful in detail, go ahead and check that out. I'll be taking all of that into consideration when making this tier list, but of course, as usual, if you think I forgot a strategy, let me know down below. We'll try to get you on the next tier list. Starting off with Rescue Ace, my friend. This wouldn't be a TheCaliEffect tier list if I didn't give you important statistics that should help you decide on whether you should play a deck. Rescue Ace has actually been topping at events, and I think one of the biggest reasons is because Rescue Ace can set 4 face-down cards with Rescue Ace Turbulence, and that is killer against a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh strategies. I do think cards like Ghostmourner, Imperm, and Effect Failure are going to be really huge against you, but getting the new Flame Tongue, the Blazing Magical Blade, does help the deck a little bit, essentially allowing you to be able to recycle back those fire monsters in your hand for later use. I think that Rescue Ace takes a good pilot. This deck can be good enough to steal some critical wins against some of the best decks in the game, but with players playing the maximum amount of interruptions to be able to stop you from resolving Turbulence and not having the best matchups against the top strategies in the game, I think it's going to take a very good player to be able to navigate Rescue Ace to victory. Make no mistake, this deck is still the little engine that could. You just got to be more capable in your could than before. Dinos, my boy. Chat, I like my Petit Pteranodons extra fried. I like when it's crispy on the tips. Because if I'm going to be honest with you guys, that's how cooked Dinosaurs is. It's going to be taking the first terminal out of here. Dinos and LeBron James took that first flight to Cancun. This strategy is just not strong enough in the game anymore. We could talk about how decks have gotten ultra consistent and how Dino still needs particular 2-card combos, but I think one of the biggest things, absolutely the biggest thing about Dino, is that Misk is still on the ban list. And I don't even know why Konami hates us anymore. Misk is at 3 in the other card games and Dino still ain't doing enough. Maybe they know something we Dino, but moving on to Centurions. In my last turn list, I may have rated Centurion a little too high. Yes, this strategy can make Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Calamity, but I also think it's a reason why Konami never even bothered to ban the card. It's because while the deck can consistently make it, can it consistently make it through interruption? All of that 100% takes a good pipe. Centurion is powerful enough to be a 1-card combo Yu-Gi-Oh deck, but unfortunately right now without the new support or Whitewoods, I would say that it takes the correct player to be able to navigate through all of the interruption that players are bringing to the table to stop you from making that Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Calamity or maybe any of your other combos. Next is Unchained. I think we can go off to say that Unchained is one of the most unfairly hit Yu-Gi-Oh strategies of all time. We all knew it was a tier 1 type Yu-Gi-Oh deck, but we knew it was tier 1 because it required a ton of skill. Shavara just made the deck a lot more consistent and a little bit more immune to hand traps, but this deck is essentially a 2-card combo deck where most strategies are moving towards a 1-card combo deck. I think that Unchained is still a takes a good pilot type Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Ironically, all 3 of these strategies are good enough to be able to perform really well at a regional level, but it's going to take a great player to be able to navigate this strategy and get the W's against some of the top decks. Infernoid, our first terminal revenge strategy. I ain't gonna lie to you, chat, I'm a big Infernoid lover, and if you guys didn't know, Infernoid has been cooking for a while. Most of the Infernoid monsters have the ability to be able to tribute themselves to banish cards out of the graveyard. That means it can get rid of powerful cards like Promethean Princess and whatever Flame Dirge wants to summon. And it also would be pretty good against Branded, Voiceless Voice, and Labyrinth. Hell, I mean, if this deck gets started, it's incredibly hard to stop. The new fusion monster, Infernoid Evil, allows you to be able to banish Infernoid cards from your graveyard to send Infernoid cards from your deck to the graveyard up to that monster's level. It's almost exactly what Infernoids need, a consistent way to send cards to the graveyard. And the new Link monster, Infernoid Flood, allows you to be able to negate monster summons. What? I think that the ceiling for Infernoids is incredibly high, especially since monsters like Decatron just so happen to be a level 1 fire monster. This may be one of the strategies that can contend with Snake Eye and possibly even take it down. Unfortunately, as a Snake Eye strategy, it's almost depressing that one of the only ways to beat Snake Eyes is still probably to play Snake Eyes. But I'm hoping Dragon Link. Holy crap. At this point in time, I think we just have to accept that Dragon Link is a worse Tenpai Dragon. Like think about it. Tenpai Dragon does everything you want to do in Dragon Link. Win the game. Now, I think you can brew up a Dragon Link Tenpai Dragon deck, but let's just be real, guys. A pure Tenpai Dragon deck has been proven to be a little bit more successful. Let's at least give Dragon Link first class tickets on the terminal out of here. It still could be a good deck, but the problem is Bestial Magnemite, Chaos Space, and a host of other cards are still on the ban list. You free those, Dragon Link is eaten again. And that's probably why they don't want to free those cards. Next is Yubel, and with the new Phantom of Yubel, this deck gets a lot stronger. And the best part about this is that now you can use Yubel as an engine to be able to summon Verugus, but also for players that are playing this strategy, you just got so much stronger because you can fuse into a monster without your super polymerization cards. And coolly enough, Yubel has been doing pretty good over this format. I think it's a strategy that can challenge. It does incredibly well against almost every single Yu-Gi-Oh strategy for the exception of Snake Eyes. Which I'm not gonna lie, it's a little weird, but Phantom of Yubel does help a ton. Vanquis Soul. Guys, I try my best to get as many strategies that I didn't talk about in other tier lists as possible, but some strategies you guys want me to re-rate or maybe even talk about them a little bit in detail, and that's why I put them back on here. Kind of like how we talked about Centurion and Rescue Ace on the last tier list, we're going to equally talk about Vanquis Soul. Unfortunately, Vanquis Soul doesn't have a lot of good things going for it. It can easily dodge cards like Imperm, Effect Veiler, and Ghost Mourner, but what it really struggles against is Yu-Gi-Oh strategies. Guys, take it from the guy that religiously plays Vanquis Soul. It is not the best dimension shifter deck, and that is what a lot of people are holding on to. It's also not really a great hand trap Yu-Gi-Oh deck. It's in a weird spot where the strategy could be really good, but is missing the correct cards to go along with it to make it ultra powerful. I think that this strategy does take a good pilot to be able to do well with. A thing about Vanquis Soul is that it is topped in almost every single Yu-Gi-Oh format. We've noticed a decline in this particular format because of the tier 0 status, but I think with the correct players, it'll still be a solid Yu-Gi-Oh deck. And soon enough, a budget one too. I think for Tearlaments, a lot of the hits have actually started to catch up to it. It's not a bad Yu-Gi-Oh strategy, but it needs help, which is kind of funny because there are several cards that are banned that we can take off the ban list and the deck will probably go crazy. I think one of the biggest ones is taking off Medora and Kelbeck. That would actually be huge for Tearlaments because it would allow you to be able to address strategies like Branded, Voiceless Voice, and Snake Eyes, but it may be just a little bit too much to be able to combat those Yu-Gi-Oh strategies. Overall, I was wrong about Lightsworn Tearlament. I thought it was a little bit stronger. I think Needs Help is the perfect spot for this strategy. It's not necessarily bad, but getting the right boost would put it back into the top rogue status, probably even in the meta status. Orcust is also another strategy that is a little bit dated, but the difference between Orcust and Tearlament is that Orcust just pretty much got all of their cards off the list. Orcust in a nutshell is a 5-year-old Yu-Gi-Oh strategy, so to put it in the needs help category is not necessarily a bad thing. We've seen what happened when Konami does give some of those older Yu-Gi-Oh strategies support. Decks like Lightsworn and Salamangreat have gotten a lot better. Hopefully Konami decides to do the same thing for the Orcust cards and give it a little bit more modern support, because it does have potential to be one of those strategies that does get support and can be really strong. I mean, it has a tuner monster but no synchro. Go ahead and fix that up, Konami. Synchron Yu-Gi-Oh decks probably reached their height with Duelist Nexus. Unfortunately, with monsters banned like Better on the Floor and Borreload Savage Dragon, you gotta terminal this strategy out of here too. Look, I don't know where you're gonna put that Yu-Gi-Oh 5D's bike, but it can't stay here. this deck loses to way too much interruption for you to even consider it as a viable rogue Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Sprite is another seemingly once overly busted Yu-Gi-Oh deck that has gotten power crept. I could say stupid things like bring back Sprite Elf or maybe even Ronin Totem so the deck can make totally awesome, but to be honest, I have a strong feeling that would probably cause more problems for other strategies than actually help Sprite. Who knows, maybe I am just being a little bit too analytical, but overall Sprite is a strategy that does need help. Fortunately enough, with every link, rank, and level 2 monster that gets introduced, it's a power up to Sprite. Just recently, we got EMP Meow Mine, which is really good, but I think overall, Sprite is just biding its time to get the correct cards to be a stronger Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Ice Barrier is another strategy that just got support from Terminal's Revenge. I'm laughing, guys, because Ice Barriers were a living joke if you've seen them when they came out. The only cards that were ever worth it were Bryonic and Trishula, and DeLorean for a whole bunch of hand loops. Now I think some of the bigger focal points for Ice Barriers is that a lot of those floodgatey-like effects are starting to come into fruition. The new monster, Gorginius, Swordsman of the Ice Barrier, prevents your opponent from activating monster effects in the graveyard. Mirror Magic, Master of Ice Barrier, fixes a lot of the strategy's problems. Before it was a deck that couldn't even synchro into its boss monsters, but because of this card, it makes synchro summoning a lot easier. And the new synchro monster, Lancia, Dragonic of the Ice Spirit Mountain, it's not an Ice Barrier monster, not only changes the battle positions of your opponent's cards, which doesn't sound too good, but the best thing is that it can summon Ice Barrier monsters from your deck. Oh, and if your opponent gets rid of it, you can special summon Trish and count it as a synchro summon. I think at first glance, Ice Barriers actually seem like a solid choice. The deck got a lot of support in the structure deck, and now it's getting a new wave of support that gives it a whole bunch of anti-meta-like elements. Now, this particular placement could be a stretch, but anytime you get cards like Anti-Spell Fragrance, Abyss Dweller, and a host of other cards inside of your strategy, it definitely makes you look twice at the particular deck and think that it could be a solid choice. Imagine Ice Barriers as a meta Yu-Gi-Oh deck, man. That'd be crazy. Salamangreat has earned its stripes over the format. People thought that hand traps like Nibiru were going to hold this deck down forever, but it's proven itself time after time again to not only be able to play through hand traps, but also be a decent strategy to go against the top meta. Salamangreat is our second strategy to be a solid choice. This deck consistently tops events and goes toe-to-toe with some of the best decks in the game. It is one of the better rogue strategies because it's good at being able to cram hand traps, but also more importantly, put yourself into positions to be able to succeed despite what you go against. It's almost like Chimera, a deck that doesn't necessarily have a strength against particular strategies, but also is really good at covering up its weaknesses. Because of Nightmare Apprentice, getting Ash, Valor, or Imperm is no longer a death sentence. And also because of Diabels, this deck is really good at checking field spells because it forces your opponent to set it in the field zone and then can destroy. Looking at you, you Tempai Dragons and Snake Eyes and all you other field zone decks. I think that this is another one of those solid choice Yu-Gi-Oh decks. Just like Salamangreat, this deck is a complete beast. Pun intended. And while it doesn't have any favorable matchups against decks, it can play around the most commonly played cards and doesn't have any unfavorable matchups. Horus Stud. Bro, I am going to take this Horus Stud strategy and I'm going to ride it till I can't no more. No homo. I know it's Pride Month, so y'all might take it the wrong way. This may be Copium, and I think in every tier list, I got to at least make one Copium take. I think that Horus is a solid choice. I think with cards like Triple Tactics Talent and Forbidden Chalice becoming incredibly popular, Horus Stun can be a strategy that can utilize those cards. Take, for example, negating your Light and Darkness Dragon so you can activate your effects and resetting its attack stat, but also just shows what type of Yu-Gi-Oh meta we could be in. Using your lockdown cards like Vanities and Majesty's Fiend alongside of Light and Darkness Dragon and the Horus cards can be guaranteed victory against a lot of the top Yu-Gi-Oh decks. And also because of this deck's simplistic approach, a lot of the hand traps just simply do not work. You're playing dead cards. It's a very fun Yu-Gi-Oh strategy if you're playing against it in one of those strategies that your opponent probably is not having fun, but it's still more acceptable than Runic Stun. Red Dragon Archfiend topped the Nationals. I don't even know what to say. I think that may be just the height of accomplishments for Red Dragon Archfiend. I'm still going to say that it takes a good pilot. RDA with the new support can make waves. We already seen what happens with the old support, but I still think that it's going to take a dedicated Red Dragon Archfiend player to be successful. Shining Sarcophagus gets some support that helps the strategy immensely. The new Summon Skull-like monster allows you to be able to take your opponent's cards. It's crazy. I think that that's huge for Shiny Sarcophagus. But the biggest problem with this strategy is that it doesn't yet have the Dark Magician monster that comes out in Infinite Forbidden. And I think because of that, I'm going to go ahead and put it in needs help. The part of needs help is that the deck just needs a little bit more time. The strategy is ironically really good and is a hard counter to Tenpai Dragon. And also because of the new Dark Magician monster, the deck can make Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, which is crazy because it makes sense why it got reprinted. Sarcophagus right now is a fairly strong going second Yu-Gi-Oh deck, but I think once we get all of those cards, it'll be even better going first Yu-Gi-Oh strategy, meaning that it'll be higher up on the tier list maybe when the new set Infinite Forbidden comes around. Ritual Beasts have had one of the most interesting competitive stories of all time. It's a strategy that was once good and then got hit for almost no reason. It wasn't viable enough to be on the ban list. Years later, Ritual Beast Ulti Kanahawk is off the list and the new support is actually crazy. I always thought trap cards like Ritual Beast Steed should have a once per turn effect, and being able to banish cards on your opponent's field with the new Link 4, because it'll never banish your Ritual Beast monsters, you'll just chain their effects, is kind of crazy. With cards like Better on the Floor, Ritual Beast Ulti Gaia Paleo becomes an even bigger threat because there isn't a lot of cards that can negate spells, traps, and monster effects. I think because this deck can out-normal summon a lot of the resistances against it like hand traps, and can play cards like Dimensional Fissure incredibly well, it just might be one of the strategies that can challenge the top decks in the game. And to be honest, if we're talking about the best of the best, I think it is the #1 strategy to be able to top the best decks in the game. Ritual Beast is exactly what a lot of these strategies want to be, a dimension shifter deck. But this deck takes it a lot farther, being able to use the resources that get banished with Shifter. It's a pretty good Yu-Gi-Oh deck and probably is the best strategy coming out of Terminal's Revenge. Raid Raptors is next, and I gotta say it did get a top, but I'm still gonna say terminal this thing out of here. Raid Raptors went from a very respectable, highly powerful rogue Yu-Gi-Oh deck to a strategy that unfortunately, in a format where everyone's playing 20 hand traps, leads snack down in the middle where it can't really play through 3. The good thing about this deck is that I do think it's the best terminal out of here strategy. If you're able to summon the rank 13 Raid Raptor, you almost essentially win. The bad thing is getting to. Phantom Knights are like these other strategies down here. 100% is a deck that needs help. There's no current cards that I can think of on the ban list that would help Phantom Knight, so possibly even just new Phantom Knight cards. That seems like a good idea to help the Phantom Knight deck, right? Ragnaraka is now Plant Link, because the deck can play almost anything. And I have to say, I was really wrong about this deck. It's a solid choice. Very good rogue deck with a ton of options. My only beef with it is that you pretty much have to play a 60 card version to be able to fit all of the tri-types and all of the stuff that you need to do to make this deck successful. And lastly is Gen X, the deck that normal summons a million times. This deck seems really good on paper, but unfortunately loses to any hand trap in the game. I'm gonna put it in needs help, which is weird. Gen X has a ton of cards that allow you to search. But if you can stop the Link 1 from giving you the normal summon after the search, then the deck's cooked. The new Synchro monster is crazy good though, and I can't wait for somebody to take it outside of Gen X and completely break it. And that pretty much sums up all of the rogue strategies from Battles of Legends Terminal Revenge. Be sure to check out these other videos so I can catch you on the next one.